Hi there, and welcome to our first community conversation with Milford First United Methodist Church. Our community conversations focus on relevant topics that intersect with faith and spirituality. I'm John Henderson, the Director of Digital and Community Engagement here at Milford First, and I'm joined by Karina Atherton, our Family Ministries Director. At Milford First, we believe that mental health matters. All year long, we've been having conversations about mental health and wellness, and are wrapping up Mental Health Awareness Month with this conversation with one of our community partners, who Karina will introduce to you just a few seconds from now. In today's conversation, we'll define mental health and wellness. We'll talk about the role that faith and spirituality play in mental health. And we'll learn about what resources are available to those struggling with mental illness and common conditions like stress, depression, anxiety, and hopelessness. So let's get started. Karina, I'll throw it over to you to introduce our guest and kick things off.
Excellent. So we're chatting today with professional Melanie Palmer, who is a training officer with Child Focus, also an independent marriage and family therapist. Has quite a bit of experience in the mental health field in a variety of settings and situations. Thanks so much for being with us today, Melanie.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and have these discussions with the community. It's really fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So tell us a little bit about mental wellness as a whole. What is it and why is it so important?
Well, I want to preface by saying that this discussion and definition or topic is really a culmination and evolution of my time, in my lived experience with my research, and not my research, but books I've read, training I've had, education, but also the experiences I've had as a marriage and family therapist, working in community mental health, working in different settings, books. It's just, I want to give credit to, this isn't, kind of me. It's sort of the culmination of all these things and what we've learned and science and where we are now with that. So I'm sort of explaining as we understand it and how I understand it from that level. So I want to start with that because I think where the starting point is really just understanding when we talk about overall mental wellness, it's really important to include the wholeness, meaning that is our physical wellness, our financial wellness, our emotional wellness, our spiritual wellness. And included in that is obviously the mental and social components of all that. And they're all integrated. So the sort of desire is to separate these things and sort of look at them from these separate kind of ways. But the reality is, and the truth is, that it's all integrated. So we really have to look at that wholeness and come at it from that lens to really, truly understand it as much as we can, to then sort of address it in that way. So I think that's just sort of a good starting point, and curious about your response to that or other additional follow-up questions.
Sure.
So for example, when I talk about that as a starting point is understanding that these different components that we just laid out will impact all the different systems, right? So if we're having stressors physically, if we're experiencing stressors and other challenges in all these different areas, that's gonna impact our overall wellness. And then sort of understanding how this all develops in the first place. So we gotta have to sort of look back at how our bodies, brain, emotions, hormones, this whole entire system that we have, that it's interacting with the environment, and then it's like this cycle situation. So what we experience as we develop as humans develops the system within us, and then how we react and respond in the world that we know to believe is then going to impact how we behave and how we respond. And so that can create our, how we're experiencing it now. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Certainly. So far more than just a simple tag of depression or anxiety, but really pulling apart all of those aspects of a person's life and past experiences, especially and how they've tolerated things in the past or not,
Right.
to develop these habits of tolerance.
I love that. So the idea is even just understanding and being curious about how these different responses or reactions that we have developed exactly how you said, and really getting more information about that in our system. So these habits that you talk about, really what it boils down to is we have, all of us have developed ways to defend and protect from our lived experiences. And we do that as a system. Our system automatically does that for us because we want to survive and live. And so as that's happened through our lived experiences, it definitely served us in that situation or in that environment. But sort of the question is, does that serve us now in the present moment? Right. And it's sort of understanding that, looking at that, starting to be curious about that, and then looking at sort of even as we even tiny humans develop and brain development, and understanding that those environments are really key in developing just what we do have in terms of our skill sets, our resilience. How do we even develop that? And the sort of, the historically, people have really relied a lot on genetics, and it was just I'm just born with this, certain brain structure, and this is how it is. And really what we know now more than ever, and the science and the research is there to help us really understand this, is that environment is much more important than we've ever known it to be. So we know we're not blaming anybody. We're not blaming parents or caregivers, but we want to understand so that we can, as a community, provide those resources, those supports, those tools to enhance the wellness of those children, those families, those communities.
And what I hear you saying there is, and what it seems to be from where I stand, is that we have talked about physical health and mental health and spiritual health and all of these things over time, but they've all been very siloed and very segmented. And it feels like, at least for me, within the last several years, that we're starting to have these conversations about the intersection.
Yes. And part of that is because we live in this culture and society of, we need proof, we need evidence. And the truth is, now with the different neuroscience and different interpersonal biology, there's so many different sciences out there now and research that help us understand this system, meaning the system that helps operate us, brain, heart, respiratory, nervous system, our gut. You're hearing a lot now about how important those microbiomes in the gut are and all that. Well, that's because the entire system is connected, and understanding that those emotions, right? The emotions impact our brain, impacts hormones, and then the other way goes around. The hormones and the nervous system and all that impacts emotions and the heart, and it all just impacts each other. And it's just really a good conversation to have, to understand, because that gives us power. That helps empower us. So you're not just saddled with, oh, it's, depression's been in my family for all these generations, which is a thing. There's a whole science about epigenetics, generational trauma and all that, which, kind of out of scope here. But, certainly some people kind of believe, well, that's just how I'm wired, which, well, that might be how you became wired. Right. But what's the great news? We can rewire, we can address these things. Absolutely. And that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. And I think that leads us right into our next question about what do we do? There is still this stigma around mental illness in many communities, and people are hesitant and just don't know what to do. They don't know what steps to take or where to go. So let's talk a little bit about some proactive steps and strategies that people can take to push against the stigma and to care for their mental health and the health of others.
Yeah, I love this question. First and foremost is really sort of being curious and exploring sort of your own lived experience and your own set of adaptations, as we call them, patterns, which sometimes is referred to as symptoms. or they're labeled in certain ways: depression, anxiety, these different things, trauma responses, and really all those things really broken down in a simple way. They are adaptations. They've developed into adaptations. Certainly there's genetic components that add to that, but in large, there's a bigger, there's just this big piece on the adaptations that we develop to protect and survive. So really, first and foremost is being curious and exploring what are our own sort of adaptations that probably have developed through our lived experience that may not serve us anymore. And, one of the examples I give in different discussions is some people maybe have a very short fuse, right? Like they may be quick to anger and they feel it. And you ask anybody, they feel it in that whole midline, or it's either their head, their chest, their stomach, they feel that. And for some people, they're described as, or they will describe themselves, well, I just have a really short fuse. And they just sort of accept because it's some genetic or some, and really, if we just start to be curious about and explore, well, I wonder how that might have served me at some point, or I wonder where I learned it, or where it's helped me and it's been functional. And then sort of, because that opens us up to the possibility of a conscious choice of change. And so really looking at our own side, doing our own work, as they say, because that way there, we can then be open to increasing our capacity to then help others, right? So if we can understand ourselves more, explore ourselves, we also then know and understand that this is collective. So I think the stigma, tying it back to your question, I'll get to it, which is stigma, really a big piece of that is the judgment, right? Is we want to separate ourselves from others. And so we want to label and we want to, blame, shame, and punish and be separate. And I think that stigma really helps people do that. It helps people stay separate. And the reality is what we're talking about here, mental wellness, mental fitness, overall wellness is fluid. It's fluid, right? There's no finish line. And it's this constant sort of evolution if we choose it to be. So looking at ourselves, understanding ourselves, then being more open and understanding that we're not different. So we're all going to have challenges, stressors, struggles, acute, chronic in some capacity. And then we can be open to just having space and really listening to other people. And that's just such a key start, is just listening to others and not judging, and knowing we all have some stress or some injury, some wound that could use healing. And it's within those safe and trusting relationships and environments that we can help create the space of healing and change. And then getting connected to, for me, I think a number one resource for anybody is really the community crisis lines. Mm-hmm. And I love that and I love giving this information because people sometimes believe, well, a crisis line, I have to be in crisis, like in this moment. And the reality is a community crisis line, such as the 513-528-SAVE, which is 528-7283, that's a Claremont and Brown crisis hotline. And you can get information, and that can be a first step of just calling to find out what is local, what resources do we have, and they can get you hooked up with those specific things based on what you're providing. Nationally, 988, which another really fantastic resource that's been out there.
I'm glad you mentioned the hotlines, because this conversation that we're having right now will accompany a blog post. And in that blog post, we will list all of those hotlines as resources for people. So thank you for mentioning.
Excellent.
Melanie, describe for us, what role do you believe faith or spirituality plays in the state of a person's mental health?
Love this question too, because when we look at some of the things we even talked on is things are not separate, and that wholeness, that integration, oneness, unity, community. I think about the research that's come out recently in terms of loneliness. Mm-hmm. And if you Google that, you can see all the number of people that were research survey, just over time and the studies in that. And they've equated to, especially in our older adults, that loneliness is, as far as risk factor, is right up there with smoking, alcohol, and even exceeds not being physically active or obesity. And that's, if you really kind of slow that down from it, that's pretty major, you know, loneliness. And I'm going to tie that to the question you asked, which is, for many people who have some sort of faith or spirituality and have access to that, that helps them not feel alone. They do feel connected to something bigger than them. They do have a resource, a support, just in and of itself, when that is present. Mm-hmm. The other piece to that is there's a lot of different faiths and spiritual groups that really understand this idea of community and connectedness and support. And and they're great places and people and communities that a person can be a part of to help enhance that socialization, connectedness, that feeling of belonging. And we know that's just a huge protective factor for so many things, but in general, just when we're talking about overall wellness.
I often have the conversation with others about, you know, regardless of your faith tradition or background, it's that community piece that is so critical, that I think that we as a society in many ways have lost, or we're trying to figure out, you know, what does community mean to us, and how does that look, you know, in 2023. So I think that is, at the end of the day, the thing that's going to sustain us is finding those community spaces like churches and faith communities and spiritual communities where you can engage and be in deep relationship with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Absolutely.
And positive relationship, the positivity and the attitude of that group, I think, is detrimental.
Safe, trusted environments. Safe, trusted environments, they are the key. That relationship, that safe, trusting relationship and environment is the key to development of these systems that we were talking about, how it develops in an optimal way, how to maintain it, and how to heal from those injuries and wounds that we've experienced through our lifetime. It is the key.
Mm-hmm. So we already touched on some of the resources that are available. And as John mentioned, we will have a comprised list of everything, but just through conversation, what resources do you know of are available in our community right now, or online for those seeking help?
Well, obviously, we're going to talk about child-focused.
Yes,
child-focused. Yeah, of course, right? You know, we're a community serving organization. It's been around, 40 plus years at this point. And we serve a variety of different counties in different ways. And just go into our website, child-focus.org. And truly, you'll see the variety of resources, but really, just understanding that what we're trying to do as a purpose and a goal is really serving that community, understanding that child, that adult, and that family system all are integrated, and we really do get that. So it's a great resource, of course. There's other resources in the community. I like NAMI as a whole too, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and they have some really great no-cost free resources, and it's a great place to get education, and there's a lot of groups and supports that they offer as well. I think that's a good resource.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, I think that wraps us up for today. So thanks, Melody, for joining us for this conversation. As we said, this information will be posted on our news and notes blog at milfordfirstumc.org. So check into that for several resources about how you can get connected with mental health resources in our community and online, and take practical steps for caring for your mental health. So if you found today's community conversation meaningful, Please do share this video. It will be on social media and on our website. You can share it in multiple places with those that you love, your family and friends. And then stay tuned for our next community conversation around another important, relevant topic coming to you soon.